right. Well, welcome back to another episode of Gravity Podcast. We're with Bruce Garfield. Bruce, thanks for taking some time to join me on the podcast.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to join you.
Yeah, I'm just looking at your background and seeing all these records hanging on the wall, and excited to kind of hear, your journey to the work that you're doing today in Columbus. But why don't we start at the beginning? Tell me a little bit about kind of your early memories, what kind of family you grew up in, and a little bit about, your parents and siblings and where you're from and all that fun stuff.
Well, we'll start with, I was born and raised in the Bronx, New York, and born into a household with a father and mother that loved music. My father was into the old crooners, the Sinatras, and Tony Bennett's and Nat King Cole's. And my mother was into popular music. In fact, from the moment I woke and she pulled me out of bed as an elementary school student, she had the radio on in the kitchen. She'd be singing, whistling with her canary to popular music. And in fact, my brother ended up becoming a child actor and was in the musical Music Man. So I was always around music. And I think one of my favorite toys as a child was that my parents bought me a record player. And I had all of the kids' records, and I'd ride on a little horse and sing along with them. So it was always a happy household. In fact, later on, my parents even got into Latin music. I guess it was a craze at some point. So I just felt that I had kind of a tune to my life. There was a melody, and I had no awareness there was a music business. All I knew was there was music.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you really remember that kind of at the early days. Tell me maybe a little bit more about like what that was like to be around music and having parents that loved music, a family that loved music. I mean, I love music, and I can remember, my dad playing tapes, and my parents, and discovering. I mean, music for me has been such a important part of my life in so many ways. What was it like growing up in that environment where it was so highly valued?
It made me happy. It made, it gave me a spirit that I just didn't have without that outside influence. In fact, I never even aspired or thought about playing an instrument until I got to middle school and realized there was a junior band. And my parents at that point couldn't really afford to buy me an instrument. Through a special program, they were able to rent me a trumpet for a few dollars a month. And I wasn't tall enough to play basketball. I wasn't able to bang a ball over the fence. I wasn't fast enough to run track. And we didn't have a swimming team or a football team in the Bronx. We had a cement field. And all of a sudden, I found myself surrounded by a different kind of team. It was a ragtag group of people, many of whom I never had known through elementary school, because there was a convergence of 4 elementary schools to this one junior high. And it was an equalizer. We had a blind kid in the room. And I was introduced to all these kids of different ethnicities and backgrounds. And so it really was a big help in socialization, because I lived in a cocoon in elementary school, being surrounded by kids in my neighborhood. And it taught me things like hand-eye coordination and even mathematics. And it boosted my self-esteem because I realized I was accomplishing something. I didn't realize there was a bass clef. I didn't realize there were chords. I just knew that I played trumpet, first trumpet, and I would be singular if I didn't have my buddies playing second and third trumpet. So it was really an uplifting experience. And it started to make me start to listen to music in a different way, because then I was listening to instrumentation and tempo as opposed to just a singer and all this great music. And then I went on to high school, and stayed in the band. It was a bigger band. And then I graduated and my parents got divorced and I moved to Los Angeles with my mother. My father was very gracious because he had to allow us to move there and he knew that we'd have a better quality of life. Well,
You were how old when you moved to LA?
just almost 18 years old.
Okay.
And I went for the first year to Pierce Junior College, and then I enrolled at UCLA. And it was an era where of social responsibility, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War was raging, and so I was exposed to all of a sudden these different influences, all the San Francisco bands, people who spoke with social, a social voice. And I also realized there was no place in a band that I wanted to be in for a trumpet. So I had a band in college, and I then realized I needed to book it. So I started calling venues. I knew nothing about it. I still didn't realize there was a business of music. I just knew there were bands and performances, and you saw them on TV, you heard them on the radio, or you read about them. So I started to book us. We were living in the Valley. And one day,
what instrument did you switch to?
I didn't switch to anything. I sang. Whoops.
Oh, okay.
People say if don't sing, Garfield, because no one would believe you've been in the music business if you sing. So I made my instrument of choice the telephone. What do you play? I play telephone. So it was an era of upheaval, and I was called by a couple of young people who were buddies of mine that had moved and migrated from Ann Arbor to Los Angeles, and they were living in Laurel Canyon. They called me and said, "Would you want to make some money this week and sell posters?" And it'll be at a Jimi Hendrix concert. I'm saying, "Oh my God, Jimi Hendrix, and you get paid?" So I went and sold posters. And at the end of the evening, when we were counting the posters in and paying off, the road manager, the royalties, this fellow with a big bushy beard and very long hair came over to me and said, "Hey kid, I like the way you handle yourself. Here's my card. Call me at my office. Come by." And to that point in life, the only office I'd ever been to was the doctor, the dentist, the dean of admissions, and sometime once or twice the principal's office. And I walked in. He was a well-known producer and songwriter named Jerry Goldstein. And as I walked in his reception, I saw gold records and different awards. And it started to crystallize. It was a business of music. So he had, tried to hire me. And I said, I really don't want to leave school. And I would go out on weekends, though, because I didn't have a class on Friday or Monday. And I'd go on the weekends. And my job was to go along with a group that was on some sort of a regional tour and sell the posters. And this went on. I went out with Jimi Hendrix. I went out with Donovan. I went out with a bunch of different artists. And then finally, one autumn, he said, "Listen, I really want you to come to work for me full time." And the Cream are going on their final farewell tour. And I think I was just 20 years old. And I was, idolized them. I had their tape in my car all the time. So I bailed. I gave my parents coronaries, but I bailed on university. And I was also I was just like taking the classes or sticking with the classes that meant something to me: philosophy, psychology, music.
Yeah.
What did I need a second or third language? Why did I need calculus? I didn't feel the need for that, organically. So I went on the road with the Cream, and there was an opening act called Terry Reid, and had a British tour manager. And I didn't hang out with the band. I was like still starstruck. And I cried the last night of the tour because it was so monumental to see Eric Clapton and Jack Bruce, 30, 40 nights. It was like, my God, I'd never in my life expected something like this would happen. And after the tour was over, I happened to bump into the tour manager of Terry Reid at the JFK in the old TWA terminal. He screamed, "Garfield, Garfield, you blank, blank." And he said, where are you going? I said, back to Los Angeles. He goes, oh, do you fancy Jimmy Page? I said, oh my God, I've been a Yardbirds fan forever. Well, we're coming to LA next month with his new band, Led Zeppelin. Why don't you come down? So, of course, I'd seen the movie Blow Up 4 times just to see the Yardbirds break up their guitars. And I'd become friends with Eric Burdon. So they came into town. I went to see them with Eric, who was like a god to them and to me. And then I realized after the first night, well, why don't I show them the posters that we did on these, Cream and Hendrix and Donovan, because no one was doing anything like that. There was no merchandising business. So if you were on stage, Brett, and I walked up and took a picture of you, one, you'd never have approval. And 2, you'd find it in every bookshop or head shop, record shop in the country within a month and never see a penny from it. So Jerry, coming from the record business, decided he would pay them a royalty. No one was doing it. And so basically I'd sit there in his office, basically becoming a messenger boy. Led Zeppelin said, hey, we want in, we want to do this. And in a year's time, I signed 3/4 of the bands in the world to poster rights because it was found money.
Wow.
And then found my.
Let me hop in there.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So let me just hop in here for a second, because I could probably listen to you just tell these stories. I mean, you kind of like glossed over, Cream and Led Zeppelin, and I mean, this is pretty cool. You're kind of like catching some of the most iconic bands and musicians, either late in their band's career or early in their band's career. I mean, I don't know. It sounds unbelievable to me. In hindsight, kind of what was like the felt experience about that? Was it like, yeah, like this is really cool. Like I cannot believe this is my life. I'm loving this. Or were you still, a 20-something-year-old kid trying to figure out, how you were gonna make it? I don't know. I'm just kind of, wondering like, well, what was this really like for you?
Well, I found myself exposed to a world that I never knew existed. And though I was still kind of shy being around some of these artists because I idolized them, I didn't even realize they were almost the same age I was. I felt this is a fabulous experience. It's exciting. I get to hear music, and I'm getting to meet people who are well-accomplished musicians and went on to become famous. And then I signed the acts that were starting to come up, like The Doors or Canned Heat, or, just all kinds of artists early on in their careers, and would realize later on that I was selecting them because of my ears. They hadn't happened really big, and I was jumping in early. I never thought of it in those terms, but it was exciting to me. And then as a result of me going after those bands, I met the managers and the record labels and their agents. And I had no concept of who I was or what I was. I was just a kid from the Bronx, the son of a bartender who was just doing a job. Here's my job, do it well. And I could not have imagined that this existed. And it was like leapfrog. One thing after another started to happen to me. And it was kind of, like, I guess enthusiasm is contagious. And I was always enthusiastic about what I did. And they called me Brucey. Hey, Brucey, come here. And Brucey, I want to hire you. So I did that. And I felt like it was time to get more involved with the music itself. So I was approached by one of the artist managers, and he hired me to work at his management company. And then I came in contact with the record label, and the record label hired me to work with them. So I was learning a craft. I just knew that if I knew about business and marketing, I developed a sense of marketing, but I also had one foot in the world of creativity. So I was kind of a unique character because people worked in kind of one lane. And I was groomed by and mentored by people who carved the face of the modern music business.
Let me ask you something. Just, I'm kind of curious from like a personality standpoint. I mean, this is just kind of my, experience of you. I think you've got like a high energy and you said your instrument was the phone, but I would say, your ability to talk and to be, energetic and to kind of get people, to like, very likable, and I'm just wondering, like, where's that come from? Is that your personality? Is that the Bronx? Is it your parents? Like, but because I'm also, kind of curious about how, you're constantly just getting hired, come with us, Brucey, come here, Bruce, manager, record label, like, those, maybe it's different today, but like, those are jobs that are not easy to come by, not easy to get your foot in the door, but it seems like for you, it was like, doors were opening kind of one after the next. What do you attribute that to?
Well, my mother had a very outgoing personality. She was the head of the Cub Scout troop. She coached the Little League team. She played ball better than most men. So I had that personality from her. And also, my father worked really hard, long hours. He was a bartender. Neither of my parents had gone to university. And so we needed I helped out financially. So I had a paper route. Then I graduated to delivering groceries for the local grocer. And I just felt that I just kind of like to do everything really well. And my mother was like that. She was really on top of things and happy, but was serious about dealing with life itself and responsibilities. So again, that was just kind of instilled in my DNA. My mother had through her whole life the gift of youth and spirit. So I attribute that to my mother. And then I never was conscious of how I was perceived. All I knew, it was a job to do, and I just wanted to do it really well. And that's what I believe people were perceiving in me. I mean, for years I had no, sense of self. I was just doing the gig. And it took, someone to tell me, kid, this is how we look at you. So
yeah,
I'm not pretentious.
Yeah, well, I mean, I do no, it's okay. I think it's a good message. A lot of times these kind of, early jobs, which seem kind of maybe, like, what is the point, other than making a little money? I'm not going to be deliver papers forever, or I don't want to go into the newspaper business, but there's so much to be learned from the experience, and I could see how you learn that doing a good job, working hard, showing people that you're a hustler, like you got validation out of that, you learned from that, and it became part of who you were professionally, which was probably attractive to people. They saw you, doing a good job, and they wanted to give you more, and opportunities kind of unfolded from there.
My parents were both really down to earth. We grew up in a neighborhood that was predominantly Jewish and with some Italian and Irish sprinkled in. And the fabric was giving, helping somebody. I couldn't call anybody by their first name without asking permission. Everybody was Mr. or Mrs. or I thought I had all these aunts and uncles because I had to call, hi, Uncle Stuart, but they weren't really blood relatives. So my parents cared about other human beings. They would reach out to help someone. I learned, I don't know how to walk through a door without opening it and letting a woman pass. I don't know how to do anything without saying thank you. And I think one of the greatest joys in life is being motivated to applaud and care. So I attribute that to my parents, and it stays with me to this day. I mean, I care. I give a damn about other people. I give a damn about the world. And I really have no real sense of how am I benefiting. I'd rather take care of someone else than take care of myself. I don't put myself first on the list. Sometimes that's been a mistake in business, but that's just who I am.
Sure. Yeah. So before we move on with kind of your career, I have to kind of just like pause because so far you've named Hendrix, Clapton, Morrison, Page, Plant. I mean, you got to give me a story. Tell me something. I mean, you were signing these guys? Were you engaging with them? Were you like around for the party, for the show? Like, give me something, Bruce.
Well, um, my boss Jerry had decided he was going to rent a house. He rented this huge mansion out of a movie in Beverly Hills, 8 bedrooms, houseboy, maid. I was making $125 a week, but I was like, oh my God, I had an expense account at the Whiskey a Go-Go, because in those days, a national new act would play Wednesday and Thursday, and then the next one would play Friday and Saturday. And I was just, going into the dressing rooms and showing them the posters and signing them. So when we moved into this big house, and Eric Burden moved in with us, I would start to invite them up, hey, come on up to the house. And eventually we would have parties with 100, 200 people. And in those days, everyone was getting high. It was crazy. And, the house was immense. We had a complete reconstruction of an English pub. The basement was a huge Mexican cantina, Olympic swimming pool, gardens. And we would end up with people like still hanging out in the morning with the houseboy and the maid serving them breakfast and cleaning up. But it was not uncommon to have the Beach Boys, or Sly Stone lived up the road in Bel Air. And these parties became famous. So when people would come to town, Led Zeppelin would come back to town as their career grew, they'd call me. Someone said, but did you know them when they did this? I said, yeah, they called me when they did that. Or I can't tell some other stories. It was really out of character, but this was just like magical, that these people were there. And we made use of the house because of business. There were no cell phones then, and there were no computers. So you needed to have a relationship and get that call when they came to town. You weren't calling someone long distance. And, one night I remember Jimi Hendrix coming up to a party, and our rules were, if you were an invited guest on the list, the security people would let you in. If you were a good-looking woman, you'd be let in if you weren't on the list, but no one else could get in. In fact, I had my brother and his buddies run the valet parking. And one night we came out and we heard this screaming, and Jimi Hendrix was literally so messed up. It really troubled me to see him that messed up, that he was like shaking this woman without even realizing what he'd done. Another really good story was, we had a house guest that really didn't like someone who was attending a party. So I had to be tasked with going down and asking this woman to leave. So I drove her and her date, who ended up becoming the editor of a big music trade, becoming one of my best friends, out. And when I came back, there's this entranceway, this huge door, opened up into this tremendous winding staircase with probably a 12-foot diameter chandelier. And Eric Burden was there. And he's turned to me and says, "Where's my conch belt?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Where's my silver conch belt?" And he was pretty inebriated. He says, "Where's my conch belt?" I said, "Eric, I don't have your conch belt." He goes, "You better tell me where it is." And the next thing I know, and he had someone holding on to his leg, and he was dragging this person along. He pulled out a pistol from under his sweater and shot out the chandelier, and crystals were spraying all over the place. He says, "Where's my belt?" I said, "Eric, for Christ's sakes, you're living with us. You're our roommate, rent free. Why would they steal your belt?" "Oh, you're right." Well, the guy hanging on to his leg, who was saying, "Eric, you're a god," he says, "Let go of me leg," was Jim Morrison. And, who lived around the corner in Beverly Glen. So, all this craziness was happening. I'm thinking of writing a book called Laugh to the Eye of a Madman, because I've had those experiences with management clients, or certainly at Capitol Records, where, I was dealing with the entire roster. I have tons of those stories.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, it's wild. I figured there's probably, an endless amount of storytelling from, those days. And it's kind of interesting, for me, because, most of those guys are like historic, icons, I mean, I've seen the movies and the documentaries and listened to the music and, you think about them almost like they're not even real people, but you were like seeing them as like, kids, young adults, like, in all of their messiness, so it's pretty fascinating. Let me uh ask you kind of, what happens? You go work for the record company and that, kind of is the next big step in your career.
Yes, what happened was I was working at a management company that was run by the guy who started my career of Jerry Goldstein. And we had two artists who were signed to Capitol Records. And I realized interacting with them that they weren't real creative. They were driven as a sales-oriented company. And I went to the president of the company. I said, I'd like to work for you. He said, what do you want to do? I said, artist development. He says, oh, Bob Dombrowski will be thrilled. He said, no, 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 no. I don't want to work for him. I want his position. I said, well, I can't fire him. He was the salesman of the year out of the Seattle offices. That's what I mean. 6 months later, I was asked to come in over a weekend, and they told me they had let go of the woman who ran the press department. And though I'd never been a publicist, I had publicists report to me at the smaller labels before. I said, Don, I'm flattered. I don't refer to journalists as critics and opinion makers. I will not work in an environment where there's a coffee table. I want a desk and a typewriter. And he said, Bruce, we don't want you to become us. We want us to become you. And that started 15 years at Capitol, where I went from the press department, then to the merging the artist development department with the press department. So I interacted with every artist on Capitol, from Paul McCartney and Wings to Steve Miller or Bob Seger, Natalie Cole. And again, I was just doing my job, but I did it in a different way. Like I said, I didn't refer, as most publicists did, to critics. I referred to them as journalists because I felt they had a responsibility to their editor, and their editor had a responsibility to their publisher. So I never dealt in flowers. I always respected them and dealt in facts. I wouldn't even go really promote someone that I felt was, not worthy of their space. And then I ran out of all the artists. Don, I've already built these careers. I think we need to get in the youth music business. We're not, these are older artists, or at least they weren't really older, but they were established. I said, I want to go to the A&R department. He goes, no, we're not letting you out. You're great there. And I threw like an empty threat. I said, well, then I'm going to leave. Okay. They gave me a chance to go into A&R. And then I was on this incredible run. I'd signed 5 or 6 super successful artists in a row. The Knack with My Sharona. I brought Duran Duran to America, Iron Maiden. And it was a run. And it was the rumor row principle. Again, I wasn't aware of what I was doing other than I was just doing a good job. And they were grooming me to be a president of the record company because they were moving me from one department to another. Eventually, they wanted me to go back to New York and bolster their presence on the East Coast. And then founded another division of the company. And Capitol was a privately held company by EMI, a British company. And one day I was informed that it had been sold to a company called Thorn that manufactured light bulbs, missile guidance systems, television sets, etc. And found that a guy from Goldman Sachs was in my office the following week with a clipboard, asking me what we did. I said, well, A&R, I sign artists, I work with delivering the records, and then I shepherd them along through the system. He said, well, I see this David Bowie person had just sold 25 million albums. So you need to get him in here and make another record for the next fiscal year. And I was saying to myself, if David walked into my office, I would say, hello, goodbye. How can you be missed if you don't go away? And then I started getting, the whole culture changed. And I was getting really, abused about spending money on this terrible band called the Red Hot Chili Peppers. And then I was informed that after 15 years, they were not going to renew my contract. And I said, why would you do this? You're making too much money. And I probably knee-jerked, and I said, I'm never going to work for someone else again. I wanted to take all the things I'd learned in all my relationships, and I went into artist management. And I spent 30 years managing artists, but my bailiwick was artists who were undervalued stocks, who had one time been very famous. And I really enjoyed learning about their history, reading contracts that were 10 or 15 years old, and looking to, change the course of their career, have their value be known. I mean, like I took Isaac Hayes and I put him in South Park. He'd never had a voice agent.
Let me ask you something. Yeah. Let me just kind of hop in there, going back a little bit. You were talking about Duran Duran and Iron Maiden and, Chili Peppers and others, but tell me a little bit about like what intuitive or kind of like expertise that you developed, an ear or an eye. What was it that you would really see that allowed you to be so good at your job? I mean, I'm sure even as you're going back, as you go forward into the management and you're looking for people that are maybe, I don't know, need a new kind of wind or a new boost of energy. You're seeing something, you're hearing something. That's a unique skill set. Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I was never into bubblegum music. I was always into something that was new and fresh. And some of the artists you mentioned, there was no one comparable to those artists. And I've always been an outside the box thinker and thought beyond just the world of records. I was into art and theater and just things that stirred my juices that I was exposed to. And I had learned, what the difference between good and bad music and authenticity. So when it came to Iron Maiden and the record company said, oh man, they'll never get on radio. I said, well, there's something unique about them. And there's this metal movement. All right, you're making a mistake. Or what do you want to sign this disco band, Duran Duran? Or there are these examples. And I was just attracted to uniqueness, authenticity. I mean, I'd like to say that I didn't hear music with my head. I heard it with my stomach. Did it make me move before I intellectualized it? Other people, think, oh yeah, that's really great lyric. But I got captured by the fabric of the music. And I spent my entire career recognizing what I believe will have a career that will continue. That's not a flavor of the moment. I didn't care what other people would sign. I only cared about what I thought. And I reach back today, Brett, and say, wow, that trumpet, which I discarded in college, that gave me tools that I didn't realize till today that I had, because it taught me about melody. It taught me about time. It taught me about all these things as a student. And I realized that I could sit with a musician and talk, be in the studio at 3 a.m. and talk to them about, oh my God, that's a terrible note. Or, if you repeat that chorus one more time, I think I'm going to rather chew on tinfoil. Or just those kinds of things. And again, I never.
Yeah, you had some. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I wasn't aware of them. They just came naturally. It's like someone who's a martial artist. As they're being trained, they say, oh, move your left hand this way, move your right hand. It came to the point where it was an involuntary response.
Yeah, sure. But that, I think it might be kind of intuitive and natural, but it also sounds like, you developed it too. I mean, that you not just listened to a lot of music, you played music, you understood what it was like to be around music. You really understood, kind of the that authenticity, that quality, that like something real that you kind of learn to really notice. It's a funny thing, like you were talking about earlier about how you started to listen to music differently when you were playing it. I'm a very, very hack, guitar player. I mean, I barely know how to play guitar, but I love it. And it does kind of shift, the relationship to music just a little bit. For me, I'm sure the more you get into it, the better you are, the bigger that shift is. But like I fancy myself as somebody who also can recognize good music. And I know that's a bit, subjective, but like I think I understand what you're talking about, that authenticity, that feeling that you get, which I do think takes a little experience to really fine tune, especially, at your level where you're picking bands.
All the experience in the earlier part of my career and to that point of Capital, I've been exposed to the best of the best. So anything that kind of just involuntary response was anything that was lesser, I just didn't feel, it didn't stir me. I always had to feel
Yeah.
stirred. I never intellectualized it at first. And I always thought outside the box. I didn't want to replicate anybody. One thing I'm always proud about is the artists I signed or I managed, there was no one like those artists. And, it's like you just start to have the sensibility. And that was all, they all stimulated me. They excited me. I was, and always just like, wow, I'm so proud to be entrusted with this one's career. And it's a, sense of acknowledgement. But again, it was just being exposed to really good music and learning about the process, because I had great mentors. I mean, I didn't know about a recording process, but I learned about
Yeah.
sonics. So
Did the business aspect of it ever change your relationship to music? I often believe that we really should follow the things that we just love and that we can make businesses out of them. If we choose to, they can just be hobbies and passion and fun, but why not also be a part of something that you love as a way to make money being in business? But the music business is a monster. So I'm wondering if it ever kind of changed your relationship in a negative way because of the business side of it.
that's a really good question. While at Capitol Records, I realized that, how the mechanics of it worked. And one thing I don't do is lie. I have no tolerance for a liar. And I was being asked to present certain business concepts or plans to an artist that I didn't feel sincere about. And then I started to see how, there's a thing called recoupable, where an expense is charged back against an artist's royalties. And I started to realize that it was imbalanced. It was predatory. And here are the artists I care about. All they have is their career. These business people have, diverse holdings and sources of income. So I really became an artist rights advocate. I cared about the artists, where I used to look at some of the people I was, worked with as, you might as well be a shoe salesman or a used car dealer, because without the artist, you're nothing. You're nothing.
Yeah.
This is what feeds the machine. So I once had a boss that would say, mark that recoupable. I said, but it's not a recoupable charge. Just let's see if they find it in the audit. And I was just like, what? That's thievery. And it
Right.
became really apparent that it's fairly predatory.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering, again, kind of like how much of that, your, hate of lies, and also then kind of like the social movements that you were a part of and your upbringing, and also your front row seat to being with the artists themselves and seeing them as human beings. How much of kind of all of that played a role in your care for the artist? You taking more of a artist care approach to the management as opposed to the business approach.
Well, I looked at them as human beings who just happen to have
Yeah.
certain talents and were focused on their careers and other people taking advantage of them. And to me, it was
Yeah.
just my inherent responsibility as a human being, as a citizen of the planet, to care. Where I was surrounded by people who, they cared they had hit records, but they didn't care how they lived, or what their finances were, or if they were getting drugs were consuming them. There wasn't that lack of concern, and my upbringing played a big role in that, and it does in my life to this day. You have to care. You just don't have to look at the bottom line. And when you're surrounded by people, look, I'm a businessman, but I found the balance between being respectful, and achieving goals that are, numbers.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's great. I wanted to I figured that's how you would say it, how you would look at it. And I think it's an important thing to make sure is highlighted, because they don't have to be, it's not an either or. You can actually be very successful and accomplish your goals, maybe more so by being caring, focusing on authenticity, integrity, honesty. I mean, these are things that I think are, really critical to success. And most importantly, kind of how you feel about yourself in the long run. Tell me, when we talk about caring, and I don't know if I'm skipping over anything important that you want to highlight. You mentioned 30 years in management. You find yourself here in Columbus now, and I know what you're up to. I don't know how many other people do, but I'd like you to just kind of talk about, how you landed here and what you're doing.
It starts with meeting a woman named Beth Jackson in New York, who was born and raised here and comes from a long line of Buckeyes. And she was hip. She had a really firm backbone. She was stylish. She was intelligent. And it was like, what planet did this woman come from? She ticks all the boxes. And when I came with her to meet her parents for the first time, it crystallized, because I realized how good and caring. My daughter, she said, Dad, is Beth for real? I mean, why do you say that, Sam? She's just too nice. I said, that's who she is. And I, like probably yourself and most people in business, look through a specific lens when you go anywhere. So, of course, my involuntary response is to look at a city through the lens of music. And over the 10 years we've been together, prior to moving here, every time I came to Columbus, I'd say, first of all, I love it. It's a city that's philanthropic. I wanted to find a place to live where I could weave myself into the fabric of a city and make a difference. Because in New York or London or Los Angeles, where I lived and worked, you're as relevant as a hiccup in a hurricane. I mean, you really can't have an impact. And I never felt like I went to work. Never. Until the year before I moved here. And I kept saying, look at the opportunity in Columbus. People are for real. This city has got interesting planning. But unfortunately, it wasn't on the radar of the music business in general. And it was like a, kind of under the radar gem. When we would have an artist touring and I'd be talking to the agent, we'd be, where are we going Friday? We're going to Cleveland. Where are we going Saturday? Detroit. Where are we going the following weekend? Cincinnati. And it was kind of like, well, we need to really make a certain amount of money this week. So, hey, let's see if we can go to Columbus on a Wednesday. When I came here, I said, this is just a perfect market. So, I mean, I decided at the end of the day, which I skipped over, that I just said, you know what? I want to change the quality of my life. I want to be close to my in-laws who are, you know, kind of hit their 90s. I didn't want a phone call. I wanted to be here. So I just closed shop, say goodbye to Sinead O'Connor, say goodbye to my consultancy clients, and just jump, decompressed, and said, wow, this city has all these venues. It has lots of recording studios. It has people that love music, but it has no infrastructure. And I was going to do a deal with someone here who's in music who wanted to finance me to start a new company. And a neighbor said, you know, there's a music commission. They're looking for their first executive director. And I said, well, that's interesting. Maybe this is a way for me to give back some of the good that's been given to me. Because throughout my career, I've nurtured interns and mentored young people who've gone on to become have very significant careers. And this person said to me, you're out of your mind. Why do you want to do this? I just want to do it. I just feel a calling to do this. And so that's what got me to the Music Commission. And, you know, the mantra of the Music Commission was, make Columbus a better place for musicians to make a living. And I said, that's a pretty broad statement. I can't find my magic wand. I never worked in a nonprofit environment. The only board I ever reported to was a bunch of piranhas who wanted 10% every single, you know, fiscal year. I liked the people who comprised the board. They were really diverse. And I applied for the position. I was vetted with 50 some odd other candidates for 5 months. And I was like kind of getting impatient. When are you guys going to make up your minds? And then finally, in August of 2018, they voted to recruit me. So I realized, because I had been going to venues, meeting people in the music business here, that quite a few of the artists I'd met who were having some degree of success locally and regionally didn't know anything about the business of music. You know, one of them was arguing, well, Spotify doesn't pay royalties. I said, yes, they do. They're minuscule. Have you ever heard of Sound Exchange? What's that? They're a body that was formed to fight for artists' rights. They will help you collect royalties. I said, if these artists don't know about that, I'm sure that no other musicians know about it. So the first thing I did was created a program called Music Business Mondays, which is now softened to Music Mondays. And over 3 years, I've had 6,000 attendees, but 55 significant leaders and experts in music come to Columbus in the last couple of years virtually. And it had a double purpose. One was to educate and enrich the lives of musicians and students, but the other one was to put Columbus on their radar. And every single one of them leaves Columbus saying, gee, I had no idea. Well, they do now. But do philanthropic organizations or the city government or the county want to help finance, quote, a bunch of musicians to learn about the business? So I visited the Franklinton Preparatory Academy and realized that it was, 3/4 of the kids live below the poverty line, the other 25% hovering at it, and they needed instruments. And I walked out that day, literally with tears in my eyes, said, that's it, we're having an instrument drive. And we called it the gift of music. And to this day, in 3 drives, we've collected and donated 2,200 instruments at a value of $250,000. So, I've been going through this progression and all the time trying to espouse from the pulpit the value of music, but intrinsically and economically. So we put these other programs together. I knew that kids today, unlike myself, grew up not knowing there was a business of music. Today, young people know there's a business of music. It's pretty obvious. So I decided that with coming out of the pandemic, that many of the local businesses couldn't afford to hire more people. They had to let people go, or they couldn't find employees. And here are these young people who want to get in the music business and have not a job, but a career. So I started a program called Earn as You Learn, and financed at $15 an hour, young high school students, some just high school graduates and young college students to work at CD 92.9 and Orange Julia recording studios and Music Go Round. And it was a super successful program. I mean, it's like great to see all these little mini people coming out and some of them earning thousands of dollars. So then I said, how do we start to build? If my end game is to improve the quality of life and espouse the value of music, how do we become a music city? Because doing that will enrich everybody. So Brian Ross had asked me to help put some music together for the ASAE conference in 2019. I said, Brian, we're going to have music everywhere. And it crystallized, oh, Music Columbus, music everywhere. So I started to basically work with Greater Columbus Arts Council, the Commons, to utilize music, local artists, to enhance Food Truck Thursdays. Silent. Now there's artists at those 12. Short North Alliance and all the other organizations of high traffic organizations or locales, which receive matching funding to some extent through GCAC, now carrying that logo. Because music tourism is huge. So we're building what I like to call a pathway to prosperity. All these little steps now getting us on the radar of government and other organizations, people like yourself. Say, oh, you're doing good in this community. You're helping youth. You're helping people of all walks of life. And I guess in the end game is to maintain that, grow that, but that we should become the nationally recognized music city we deserve to be. Because we've been launching careers here in Columbus and in Central Ohio for 7 decades, going back to Dean Martin and Doris Day and Roy Rogers, the singing cowboy, and whether it's Devo or Rascal Flatts and Dwight Yoakam and John Legend and 21 Pilots and Camp and Lydia Lovelace. And they all have 4 things in common. Born here, raised here, career started here, and every dollar of their income stream benefits a different state. And why is that? No business infrastructure. And one of the goals for me is that I'd like to see us get the financing to start a nonprofit, non-predatory record label, which can give the tools to a young artist or a blossoming artist where they can't afford a few $1,000s to do a video, or they don't know how to get global distribution except like everybody else through DistroKids, or provide studio time, or a person who's expert in digital media, or someone that could take it to radio. And it all ties into, kind of, it's like I said, this pathway. So, every major city that's become a music city started with a record label of great note. Memphis had Sun Records and Stax Records. Chicago had Chess Records. Nashville started with Dot Records. If you'd say, what's the visual you associate with Hollywood? It'll be the Hollywood sign in the Capitol Records building. And, it's just been like that. So anyway, that's
let me ask you.
Yeah.
So that's great. And, I really appreciate it. You and I have talked about what you're up to before. It's good to kind of hear the full scope. And, I think what strikes me is that becoming a nationally recognized music city isn't going to necessarily just happen. It's something that you've got to build over time by supporting and developing musicians and having this business aspect. I like the idea of the non-predatory nonprofit label. And then, I guess my final question for you, as we're starting to run out of time, is what's the big thing? Is it the label, or is there something else that's the big thing that you think puts us over that hump? Like, what is this all working towards? And then, like, what's the end result of it?
Well, it's a combination of things, like, venues of national note. The City Winery is opening its 10th location here at the end of this year. I called Michael Dorf and said, Michael, you need to come to Columbus. There's a vacuum for a venue of your type here. And he said, you're right. I love Columbus. Kappa is taking the church they've owned for 5 years on 3rd Street across from the Sheraton, and it's going to be turned into a more contemporary venue. So it's venues. It's a sensibility that music tourism is important. Also, there is discussion of creating a music density zone or district. And I think that we've got all these great venues, but where are they centralized? You've got, Ace of Cups and Space Bar and Dirty Dungarees up, at the far end of High Street. But I think, actually, it's germane to yourself, that trying to build something like that in Franklinton would be a likely place because of the old bones. It's, adventurous. It's got an art scene. It has progressive thinkers there. And also attracting large festivals. We've had Rock on the Range, which, transferred to Sonic Temple. That's the longest running rock concert series in America. You've got Promo West and Kappa, which are known nationally in the music business. So it's not going to be an overnight process, but I think it starts with attracting people here. And I don't know if I've given you the formula. It's kind of like, I shoot from the hip sometimes, and I work.
Yeah, no, that's okay. No, it's working, and I can see it happening. And yeah, we're excited about the conversation in Franklinton. And actually, my next guest is Jim Sweeney, so we're talking Walnut Street Live and everything else, you and I've talked about as far as district goes. And I know we're going to get together and try to make that happen. I want to see that happen. I agree. For me personally, as a, lover of this city and a lover of music, I think we do lack that kind of concentrated, experience of music that, like, hey, you can go down to that neighborhood any weekend, any night, and you're going to hear music. And it almost doesn't matter, kind of who's playing, because you're going to, get that feeling of being around live music. And I think we need to do that as a city. I think this city would love it. And I think it would be good on a number of levels, including economic development and tourism. So I'm on board, and I love what you're doing. And it's fun to hear your story and just a little bit of it. I know there's so much more we probably didn't cover, but we ran out of time, and I'll give you a chance for any, final thoughts.
Final thought. There's music in all of us, and we should take advantage of that, because you can't find anybody that doesn't know how to tap their toe unless they're in a morgue. So I think everyone just has to open their eyes to what the value of music is. Everything I've outlined, from early human development to economic development, because you can't have economic development without having human development first.
No question. Wonderful. Well, Bruce, look forward to working together and making some music in Columbus. And thanks for your time and sharing your story today.